Behold the wonder, something many of you have never seen before, a conference talk with no slides. All right? I need your help to get through this, but we're going to attempt it. My name is Maciej Ceglowski. I am an immigrant, and I have a fond memory of coming to the United States in 1981 from Eastern Europe with my mom and experiencing the wonder that was the Safeway supermarket, my first supermarket. We'd go there every week, and for a kid from the Eastern Bloc, it was pretty astounding to see something like an aisle of breakfast cereals, which was essentially a bunch of cartoon characters telling me to eat sugar. That was not something that carried over from my experience in the communist countries. And each time I went, my mom would give me a quarter to play Pac-Man. Being a good socialist kid, I thought the goal of Pac-Man was to help Pac-Man, who was lost in a maze, find his friends. So my games would not last very long. The correct way to play Pac-Man, you all know, is that you consume as much as possible while running from the ghosts that chase you. So it's a good primer into what it means to be an American. The game taught me that the technology and ethics are actually not so easy to separate, and that when you want to figure out how a computer system works, it's always a good idea to follow the money. But today, the technology that ran that arcade game, it permeates every aspect of our lives. We're here at this emerging technology conference to celebrate it, to find out what the exciting new developments are, to get ahead of the curve. But just like the tail follows the dog, ethical concerns about how technology affects who we are and how we live together as a society, they follow us around. And we can run faster, but we can't get away from them. And this year especially, there's an uncomfortable feeling in the tech industry that we did something wrong. That in following the credo of move fast and break things, we unintentionally knocked down some stuff that was actually the load-bearing walls of our democracy. We don't really want to take blame for it, but we feel uneasy. So you see a consensus now that we're talking about people being too deep in their filter bubbles, and we have a mysterious situation where Americans have somehow polarized themselves into opposing camps. Worried CEOs and venture capitalists are roaming the landscape. They're peering into the churches and diners of Red America trying to find answers. Steve Case, the founder of AOL, is roaming the middle of the country trying to get people to start startups. Mark Zuckerberg has a photographer in tow, doing beautiful photo shoots of him talking to the people. According to this reading, the polarization is a baffling phenomenon that came from outside tech, but one that we can fight from within tech with better fact-checking, with more empathy. And in Facebook's case, of course, they're going to deploy advanced algorithms and AI to steer conversations in more productive ways. But a question very few people are asking is whether the tools of mass surveillance and social control that we spent the last decade building could have anything to do with the debacle of the 2017 election, or whether destroying local journalism and making national journalism almost entirely dependent on these platforms might not have been a stellar idea. So we built the commercial internet by mastering techniques of persuasion and surveillance that we've now extended to billions of people, including essentially the entire population of the Western democracies. But admitting that this tool of social control might be conducive to authoritarianism is something that we're not ready to face. You know, we value freedom, so how can the tools and techniques that we've built and that we still run not be something that serves freedom? As Upton Sinclair said, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. I'm going to contend in this talk that there are structural reasons to worry about the role of the tech industry in American political life, and that we have a brief window of time in which we can fix it. So, the economic basis of the internet is surveillance. Every interaction with a computing device leaves a data trail, and whole industries exist that consume the data. Unlike dystopian visions in the past, this mechanism isn't run by evil governments and dystopian kind of faceless corporations entirely. It's also run by a small group of sympathetic tech companies run by quirky founders who want to build Mars rockets and do cool things with robots that make the world better. Surveillance is just a way for them to pay the bills. And while the Snowden revelations in 2012 made people anxious about government monitoring, they don't seem to feel the same anxiety about commercial surveillance. It's accepted. And it's a striking fact that mass surveillance has been driven almost entirely by private industry. Anyone who owns a smartphone right now carries a tracking device that knows with great accuracy where you've been, who you last spoke to, has all your photographs, has really intimate details of your life. You carry it in your pocket voluntarily. If the government made you carry it, we'd be in the streets protesting. Internet providers collect and can sell your aggregated browsing data to anybody they want. And a wave of smart devices for the home is competing to bring this internet surveillance into the most intimate spaces. Enormous ingenuity also goes into tracking people who try to opt out of this whole situation and circumventing their attempts to block and avoid surveillance. With the exception of China, which has its own setup, the information these sites collect on users is stored permanently and with almost no legal oversight in the United States on servers that we don't know their location, we don't know who runs them, but we trust the system. And two companies in particular dominate the world of online advertising and publishing, the economic engines of the surveillance economy. The first is Google, valued at $560 billion. That's yesterday. It might be different today. It's the world's de facto email server. It occupies a dominant position in almost every area of online life. It's unremarkable for a user today to connect to the internet on a Google phone using Google hardware, talking to Google servers on a Google browser while blocking ads served by Google AdSense on sites that track visitors with Google Analytics and DoubleClick and whatever else it is that Google owns. And through initiatives like AMP, Advanced Mobile Pages, Google is also attempting to extend its reach so it becomes a proxy server for the publishing industry. And then Facebook. Valued at $400 billion, it has close to 2 billion users and is aggressively trying to expand to the next billion. It's the world's largest photo storage service. It owns the world's largest messaging service, WhatsApp, with 1 billion users. And for many communities, Facebook is the tool of choice for political outreach and organizing, for event planning, for fundraising. It's the primary source of news for a sizable fraction of Americans, and through its feed algorithm, which determines who sees what, has an unparalleled degree of editorial control over what that feed looks like. Together, these companies control 65% of the online ad market, which in 2015 was $60 billion. That's the entire ad market. So of that amount, half went to Google and $8 billion went to Facebook. Facebook, the smaller player, is more aggressive in the move to new ad and content formats, particularly video and augmented and virtual reality. These companies exemplify the centralized feudal internet of 2017. So while the protocols that comprise the internet remain open and free, in practice, a few large American companies dominate every aspect of online life. Google controls search and email, Amazon controls cloud hosting, Apple and Google have a duopoly in mobile phone operating systems, and Facebook, of course, is the one social network. There's more competition and variety among telecommunications companies and gas stations than there is among these internet giants. And all these companies have one thing in common, which is an insatiable appetite for data. They want to know where their users are, what they're viewing, where their eyes are on the page, who they've been with, who they're with now, what they're discussing, if possible, what their heart rate is, if they're asleep or awake, any possible piece of data they can find. They have two interlocking motives for this data hunger. The first one is to drive online advertising, and the second is to train machine learning algorithms. Everyone's familiar with online advertising. The ads are served indirectly. It's based on real-time auctions that are conducted at the moment the page is served, and it goes through a maze of intermediaries. This highly automated market is a magnet, unfortunately, for fraud, so a lot of the complexity in modern ad technology goes into additional and very invasive countermeasures against it to make sure that there's a real human being sitting at the keyboard or in front of the phone. But curiously, despite years of improvements in the technology and the amount of user data available to the ad networks, online advertising isn't really targeted that well. And you can prove this to yourself just by turning off ad blocking for a week and seeing the kind of ads that you're served. I think just last week, Chase Bank stopped serving ads to 95% of the websites on its list. It went to a whitelist because it was terrified that its ads were appearing next to on some right-wing sites. And according to Chase, it didn't see any difference in its metrics, even after cutting out 95% of domains. So it's an odd situation where the advertising kind of works in very opaque ways. Many advertisers are simply not equipped to use the full panoply of these surveillance options. People are just kind of checking boxes in a spreadsheet because their boss wants them to have this kind of tracking and that kind of tracking. So that's one reason for it. Another reason is that adversaries, like I said, have become really good at gaming these online ad marketplaces, which introduces noise into the system and makes the targeting work not as well. An uncharitable, but I think accurate description of online advertising in 2017 is these robots that are serving ads to other robots, and we're kind of on the margins of that. A considerable fraction of the money that's sloshing around in the system goes to scammers. Unfortunately, only Google and Facebook know the true numbers there. So surveillance giveth and click fraud taketh away. The surprising ineffectiveness of targeted advertising, though, creates pressure to collect more data, not less. Ad networks are not just evaluated by how much money they're making now, but by expectations about what new ad formats are going to make possible in the future, this dynamic that I've called investor story time. The more poorly your ads are performing today, the more room there is tomorrow for new algorithms and new forms of data to create these magical levels of ad engagement that everybody wants to see. And of course, they're going to require new forms of surveillance to make happen. This trick of constantly selling the next version of the ad economy works because new ad formats really do have better engagement than old ones. Advertising is like a disease. It takes people time to develop immunity and tolerance, and even the first banner ad had a click-through rate of 70%. So while the drive for novelty is good for the ad networks, it hurts publishers and anyone else trying to earn a living from the actual ads. Consider Facebook Instant Articles, which rolled out with great fanfare a few years ago and now are a dead end for online publishers. Facebook promised that this much faster loading format would drive engagement. But soon after launching, it kind of lost interest in Instant Articles and turned its attention to video, and now it's working on augmented reality. Publishers who retooled for Instant Articles or are now retooling for video are going to find themselves in the lurch when Facebook picks the next big thing that it's interested in. So the real profits from online advertising are concentrated between the two companies who run the casino, Facebook and Google. And anyone trying to make a living from the ads themselves finds they have a difficult time. The other factor that drives this data hunger is machine learning. This is a blanket term for a set of mathematical tools that can mimic human understanding in a wide set of domains. To work properly, machine learning requires enormous quantities of training data and real data from real people. Companies use machine learning to offer desirable product features like recommendations engines, image classifiers, machine translation, and they also use the techniques to target their advertising. Sometimes the machine learning algorithms work so well that you can package them up into a product of their own. Consider Google Home and Amazon Echo, or those are the always-on home microphones that you can talk to, or the Nest thermostat that sits on your wall and monitors who's walking in and out of the room. These devices can only exist because the machine learning algorithms are good enough to make them work, but they'd also drive a feedback loop where once you have them installed in homes, you have additional streams of data surveillance that can feed back into the advertising and into more products, and it kind of ratchets up. Everything moves in the direction of greater surveillance. We always assume that when machines reach near human performance in tasks like image recognition, it would be because of fundamental breakthroughs into the nature of how things think. That we could lift the lid on the human mind and like a Swiss watch, we would see all the little moving parts and understand the structure somewhat. But what happened instead is weird. We combined fairly simple math with really big data and got terrific results, but we didn't advance our understanding of why that's true at all. The mathematical techniques used in machine learning don't have a complex, intelligible internal structure. They're just giant matrices. They're a tangle. It's like opening up someone's head. All you see is brain goop. All we see is matrices. It doesn't help us understand why these things work the way they do. But because machine learning tracks human performance in some domains like translation or object recognition really well, there's this temptation to anthropomorphize it. It acts human, so we start to think of it as human. In particular, this is a point that I'm stealing from Zeynep Tufekci, who gave an excellent TED Talk on this. We assume that when the machine makes mistakes, it'll make human mistakes, which is not true at all. The algorithms are irreducibly alien. They're creatures of linear algebra. We can spot some of the ways they make mistakes because we're attuned to them, but others are going to blow right by us because they don't resemble human error patterns whatsoever. But for example, if you have an image classifier that recognizes animals and objects, it can have human equivalent or better performance trained on photos. But you can fool it by showing an image that looks like pure static and convincing the computer that what is a picture of a school bus is actually a panda. To the human eye, you don't see the difference. All you have to do is superimpose a little bit of carefully tuned pixels onto the bus photo, and the classifier will tell you with great confidence that you're seeing a panda, even though to us it's absurd. And this is what I mean by alien failure modes, that this kind of mistake has no relationship to how human vision works. It's not the kind of mistake we make when we confuse things that are similar to one another. And because the image classifier is normally so good, it shocks us to see it fail in this way. Now, these failure modes become important when we start using machine learning to affect human beings. The learning algorithms don't have any ethics or boundaries. They're completely amoral, and there's no slot in the algorithm that says, put the moral compass here, or add ethics, or any way to tell the algorithm that certain inferences it's making are correct but morally wrong. So when we apply them to human beings, we leave ourselves open to some really unpleasant surprises. And the issue isn't just intentional abuse, that people can train this stuff on data that has biases, or that there might be biases inadvertently left in the data, but fundamental to how the algorithms work. So these are the twin pillars of our online economy. We have this apparatus for harvesting tremendous quantities of personal data from users, and then we have a set of effective but completely opaque learning algorithms that we train on the data. The algorithms learn how to show people the things that they are most likely to engage with. That means click, share, view, react to, post to their feeds. We make the algorithms very good at provoking these reactions from people, and this is our $60 billion industry. So what happens when these tools for maximizing clicks and engagement creep into the political sphere? It's a delicate question, right? If you concede that they work just as well for politics as for commerce, you're inviting government oversight. If you claim they don't work well at all, then you're telling your advertisers that they've been wasting their money using your ad engines. So Facebook and Google have tied themselves into pretzels over this. The idea that these mechanisms of persuasion could be politically useful, and especially that they might be more useful to one side than the other, violates these cherished beliefs we have that our industry is apolitical. And whatever bright line we imagine separating commerce from politics is not something that the software running these sites can see. All the algorithms know is what they measure, which is the same for advertising as it is for politics. Engagement, time on site, who shared what, who clicked what, and who is more likely to come back for more. The persuasion works. And it works the same way in politics as it does in commerce, by getting a rise out of people. But political sales techniques that maximize engagement have troubling implications in the political realm. One problem is that any system that tries to maximize engagement will try to push users towards the fringes. You can prove this to yourself by opening YouTube and opening it in an incognito browser so there's no history, no cookies, and clicking anything with political content and then clicking the recommended videos a few times. I tried this experiment last night. I started with a video about protests in Berkeley, and within 5 clicks, I was reading things about Trump planning World War III in North Korea, and someone analyzing FEMA's plans for mass genocide based on the ink color of the stamp on a card they'd received from FEMA. So when you try this on other stuff that's not political, if you try this on baby animal videos, what you get is a series of baby animal videos. But the algorithms have learned that with politics, users who are interested in this stuff respond more if they're provoked more. So the algorithms provoke you. Nobody told them not to. And this behavior is not programmed into the system. It just arises from correct observations that these algorithms make about human nature and act on. Social dynamics on sites where people share links can compound this radicalizing force. The way you maximize engagement on Twitter, for example, is to say provocative things or to hoist an opponent's tweets out of context and use it as a rhetorical bludgeon against them. Twitter rewards captious people. On Facebook, the social dynamics and the algorithm's taste for drama reinforce each other. And so Facebook selects from stories that your friends have shared to find links you're most likely to click on. This is a potent mix because what you read and post on Facebook is not just an expression of your interests, but it's part of a performative group identity that you're showing to the people you care about most. So without explicitly coding for any of this behavior, we already have a dynamic where people are being pulled to the fringes. Things get worse when you let third parties use these algorithms to target a specific audience. An important feature of the experience of politics on social sites is that feeds are really personal. What you see is what you see, and you don't know what anybody else has shown. It has troubling implications for democracy because it moves this kind of political communication that used to happen in the public sphere, through advertising, through speeches, through stuff that everybody could monitor, into a very personal one-on-one interaction. Political speech that tries to fly below the radar has always existed, but in the past it was possible to catch it and call it out for what it was. But when no two people see the same thing in their feeds, it becomes difficult to trace any orchestrated attempts to target them in political campaigns. These techniques of advertising under the radar were used to great effect in both the Brexit vote and in the US election. What we have is this inversion in political life that we didn't see before. Conversations between people that used to be private, that used to be ephemeral, are suddenly part of the permanent record, and you can point to them, and they take place in a very public venue. And conversely, the kind of political messaging that used to take place in public view is now visible to an audience of one. So in this situation, whoever controls these algorithms that are showing the feeds has great power. Decisions like what is promoted to the top of a news feed can swing elections. Small changes in UI can drive big changes in user behavior. And there are no democratic checks or controls on this power. And moreover, the people who exercise it, the people running the big tech sites, are trying really hard to pretend that that power doesn't exist. Political and commercial advertising also are independent financially in a way that blurs boundaries even more. Politically engaged people spend more time online and click more ads. So if you go to like alarmist and conspiracy-minded people also make good targets. If you go to kind of listen to talk radio, the fringe stuff, or you go to these sites that talk about where preppers hang out, talking about imminent world destruction, you see they're full of ads for supplements, gold coins, mutual funds, weird vitamins, freeze-dried food that are being pitched by the same people who present the conspiracy theories. Many of the sites peddling fake news during the election were operating just solely for profit and field-tested articles on both sides of the political spectrum to see which would work better. This time around, they found that the right wing was more lucrative, so we got fake news targeted at Trump voters. But it was a financial decision. And conversely, many of the propaganda sites find that online advertising is a really good source of revenue and depend on it to fund their operations. So why this all matters? Surveillance capitalism offers these exceptionally subtle levers of social control. Apart from the obvious chilling effect on political expression when everything you say is recorded and stored somewhere forever, there's the chilling effect of your own peer group looking at what you're saying, and the lingering doubt that anything you say might eventually, even if it was said in a private context, be shown in a public one. We have no way of safeguarding the large amounts of data we collect in the long term, so a real worry for anyone is that their private lives are going to be publicized. Throughout the election, private communications by low-level staffers were leaked and used as a potent political weapon. The message was very clear: stay out of politics or everything is fair game. Nothing in your life will be left private. And social media also proved useful at shifting people's attention, especially journalists' attention away when they were getting too close to interesting stories by creating diversions and drama. Orwell imagined a world where the state could shamelessly rewrite the past. But the internet has kind of done it one better, where we've discovered that people are happy to do this work themselves, provided that they have their peer group with them and a common enemy to unite against. They will happily construct alternative realities for themselves and adjust as necessary to fit the changing facts. And finally, surveillance capitalism makes it harder to organize effective long-term dissent. In a setting where attention is convertible into money, social media will always reward drama. Dissent, conflict, iconoclasm, and strife are the things that get you attention online. There are no comparable rewards for cooperation, de-escalation, for consensus building, for compromise, qualities that are essential for the slow work of building a movement. People who should be looking past their differences will instead spend their time on purity tests and trying to outflank each other until they can get to the fringes. So the big question we all face is, can we fix it? Obviously, institutions can be destroyed really quickly. They take a long time to build, and it's not clear that we'll have that kind of time to build ones to replace things like local journalism. A lot of what we've called disruption in the tech industry has just been killing these flawed but established and long-lived institutions and mining them for parts. When we do this, we make a dangerous assumption about our ability to undo our own bad decisions or the time span required to build institutions that match the new reality. Right now, there's a small cast of programmers in charge of the surveillance economy. And we have broad latitude to make changes to these algorithms, put a lot of new things in place if we choose to do so. But that situation is not going to last very long. The kinds of black box machine learning that have been so successful in the age of mass surveillance are going to become commoditized and will no longer require skilled artisans to deploy and run them. Moreover, powerful people have noted and benefited from the special power of social media in the political arena. They will not sit by and let programmers dismantle useful tools for influence and social control. It doesn't matter that the tech industry considers itself apolitical and rationalist and sort of divorced from this context. Powerful people did not get powerful and do not stay powerful by seeding tools that help them gain power. The window of time in which the tech industry can still act is brief. While tech workers retain relatively high influence in their companies, and before powerful political interests have put down roots in the tech industry, that is the only time available to us. to fix anything. I've divided the changes that I think we need into two groups based on how they affect existing business models. The short-term solutions are changes that mitigate some of the harm that the surveillance economy has caused without requiring total reforms. The long-term changes are also necessary, but they're more difficult because they will upend business models. We can compare this to defusing a bomb. The immediate task is to disconnect the wires and turn off the blinking timer, but the longer-term task is to get rid of the pile of explosives and render it safe. Removing the timer is urgent and necessary, but if we leave the explosives in a pile where they are, we're just going to have this problem recur. So the key changes we need to make in the short term, I believe, without requiring sites to relinquish their business model, are to teach social software to be more forgetful, to give it predictable security properties, and to sever the financial connections between online advertising and extremism. Let me talk about the forgetfulness part. Memory works in a really odd way in online spaces. On a site like Facebook, everything is permanent, right? Once provided, the data can never truly be deleted unless you take the draconian step of deleting your account. You can't even remove your phone number from Facebook. It'll just show your phone number with a nice line through it. You know, we know what it is. You tried to delete it. We still got it. If you want an interesting surprise and you're an Android user or if you've enabled Google Maps on your iPhone and given it the permissions, go to your Google location history. You'll see where you've been for years and years. And all of that is not only available to you, but it's available to anyone who gets access to your phone and your Google account. So it's always there for the taking as soon as you want it. This kind of like perfect memory is nothing like real life. It feels weird. Most of what we do and say is forgotten within a short time. And in the rare cases where you want a permanent verbatim transcript, you have to set up a special, circumstances to make it happen. It doesn't happen by default. And things that we do in one context in daily life are not likely to come back to haunt us years later in a completely different venue. But the online world forces individuals to make these daily, irrevocable decisions about what is going to be their online footprint. Consider the example of the Women's March. Did anybody go to that a couple of months ago? All right. The Women's March was organized on Facebook. And the list of people who RSVP'd to the Women's March, about 4 million people came out and marched. That lives somewhere on Facebook servers. And it's not clear who controls it, why it's being kept, who has access to it. We assume that Facebook has good intentions and safeguards that material, but it's going to live there until Facebook goes bankrupt, or until it gets hacked, or until it's bought by a hedge fund, or until some rogue sysadmin decides that that information needs to be freed. Anybody here a Friendster user back in the day? Some people? I was a Friendster user. Has anybody visited Friendster and know what it actually is today? I think it's a gaming site in South Korea now. I think it's being passed around by, But the Friendster data is somewhere. It's in someone's basement under a layer of dust. And Facebook is a great company, but the lifespan of these companies is not very long, even the most successful ones. Time passes. So it's a very interesting question where this stuff is going to end up. Any group that uses Facebook to organize comes up against this problem, and a lot of groups are using Facebook to organize. But keeping the data around forever is not even central to Facebook's business model. The algorithms that it uses favor recency. They want to know the stuff you've been up to lately, not ever. And their output is not going to drastically change if Facebook just forgets what you were doing 3 months ago or 3 years ago. So we need the parts of these sites that are used heavily for organizing, like Google Groups or Facebook, event pages and Facebook groups, to become more ephemeral. There needs to be this user configurable time horizon after which membership lists disappear and messages disappear. People call these disappearing messages, but that makes it sound furtive, which it's not. It's just an attempt to map the behavior more onto what we expect from everyday life. And the obstacle to giving groups and events this kind of fixed lifespan are organizational. They're not technical. All it requires is someone in management to care about this and to request that it be built. In some cases, we don't even want the data to disappear. We just don't want it to be as accessible as it is. Consider the case of mobile phones. People routinely have their phones stolen, they lose them, and especially when you travel, you're at high risk of being separated from your phone. If the phone is unlocked, whoever gets it and gets their hands on it has complete access to your account. And not just complete access to your account, but they can look at interactions that you don't even remember, people you don't know that you knew, because your entire online archive on both Facebook and Gmail is available through your mobile device. This has been a problem in the news lately because borders are now checked, customs agent at the border are now asking for people to log into their accounts. But there's really no earthly reason. You don't travel with a suitcase full of every important document that you've ever had, but we're made to do this with our mobile devices. So when I talk about ephemerality, it's not just forgetting things entirely, it's also making kind of the default view not be the forever everything in the archive view, but something more limited in time with a shorter horizon to better reflect, again, the way that human beings actually expect things to behave in the real world. And then let me talk about security. Security is important because it gives you predictability. If you know that your messages are end-to-end encrypted and they're done and the encryption works, then you can say things that you would not say in an email. Given tools that have reliable security properties, people can better partition their activity between private, public, and semi-private spaces and use them with confidence that they'll stay that way. Without proper security, they have to assume that even the most private conversation will eventually be posted in public. And a lot of the chilling effect in online discourse comes from the fear that these privacy boundaries are going to get violated, that the rug will be pulled out from under you, and statements you made in one context will be held up for public ridicule in quite another. The good news is that we have the technology to do all this, but the bad news is that the implementations are haphazard and often implemented in this user-hostile way. I want to be specific about the security needs we have. One is universal support for U2F security keys. Does anybody have one on them or use one? Anybody can wave one around triumphantly? All right, imagine in your mind a little thumb drive. A U2F key looks just like that. It is a very effective defense against phishing. With the U2F key, even if you give me your password, I can't log into your email account because the key can't be fooled and it talks directly to the browser and the server. So this is a super effective technology that fights one of the biggest threats facing people, phishing, but it hasn't been deployed in a user-friendly way. Many of you have never heard of it. That should not be the case. Cryptographically secure end-to-end encryption on all forms of messaging. So iMessage, Twitter direct messages especially, Google Groups, Gmail, all of this stuff should be encrypted like Signal and WhatsApp already are, end-to-end in a way that the server can't access. An Android phone that is as secure as an iPhone. Android phones are horrible right now. Google prides itself on its ability to make devices that are better than Apple's, but they have not cared about security. So you are materially less secure with an Android phone. There's no earthly reason that proud Google can't ship an iPhone equivalent in terms of security, but they don't. Secure and usable group messaging. Right now, you can pick one or the other, but you can't have both. One-click settings that enable the highest levels of security for users who need them. So if you're an activist or a journalist, you turn one button on and suddenly your device is as secure as it can be configured. You don't need an expert to help you. Better defaults and options for opening attachments in email. This is a way that many people get hacked, and we don't have good solutions for it. And now that our browsing history can be sold and resold, a trustworthy and privacy-preserving virtual private network. Maybe two, dare to dream. Finally, some sort of viable alternative for mailing lists and that kind of communication that doesn't live inside of Facebook. Past experience has shown that security is achievable. All of these dreams can happen. All it takes is for people to actually care, who have the power to push it through. And the final short-term step is defunding. Defunding extremism. We need to disconnect the most blatant forms of online extremism from their money supply. And here the Google monopoly on online advertising actually works to our advantage. In recent days, many companies have pulled their ads from Google for fear of having them appear on far right-wing sites. They call this brand protection. And it's a useful step. It's also an area where we can turn the tools of surveillance against the people who are making money on extremist sites from ads by just making sure that if, as I saw recently, a Perrier ad comes up on a far right-wing conspiracy site, the nice people at Perrier Marketing know and are told that their product is being shown in this context. It's a very effective way of cutting off the money supply from some of the worst offenders on the web. But what we need ultimately are long-term solutions. The security, the ephemerality, and defunding can help us stabilize what's going on, but to have a recognizably human online world, we need to make structural changes as well. Above all, people need to have control of their data. They need a way to carve out private and semi-private spaces for discourse and some sort of functional public arena that politics can happen in, that everybody can see. They also need robust protection from manipulation by algorithms, whether they're well-intentioned or not. It's not enough to have Stanford grads who are deciding how to reinvent society from their office, startup office. There needs to be accountability and oversight as well, because we are, after all, a democratic society. Some of these changes can only come through regulation. And because companies always find creative ways to collect data, even if you try to regulate or ban it, what I always propose is that we make the locus of regulation the data store. No matter how you collect the data, you have to throw it into one big pot for all your machine learning to work, so we regulate the pot. In the past, I've proposed 6 fixes to the internet, and hey, I'll propose them again. They were good. The first one is simply the right to examine, download, and delete anything that's stored about you. Pretty reasonable request that is essentially impossible. Even for sites that offer, Google, you can get a download of all your activity, but you can't really get a download of all the behavioral data they've stored about you that they have. There's a lot more there than what you see. Second, a time horizon, which is weeks long and not years long, for how long companies can retain behavioral data. When I say behavioral data, I mean anything that you didn't give them. So if you store a photo on Google, they're allowed to keep that as long as you want it there. But if they notice that you're browsing from here in Philadelphia in a conference, that piece of information is not something you willingly shared. It's an observation about you. There should be a time limit on how long it can be kept. I'm not a monster. I'm not saying don't keep it at all, but limit it. Limit it to months and not years. 3, a prohibition on selling or transferring collections of behavioral data, whether outright or in an acquisition or in bankruptcy. If a company sells to somebody else, that data should die. If the company goes bankrupt, nobody should be able to buy it at auction. That data goes away. If you really want the data in the acquirer, then you download it and you re-upload it a week later when everything is set up. A ban, this is my favorite, a ban on third-party advertising. Ad networks can still exist, but they can only serve ads that are targeted against the page content. All of this stuff about what we know about you, who you are, where else you've been, retargeting, all of this stuff goes away, and the huge ad fraud market goes away as well. People can still use third-party networks, but those networks can't remember anything between requests. Number 5 is an off switch for internet-connected devices that physically cuts their access to the network. And the switch shouldn't prevent the device from doing anything else that it's supposed to be doing. So, you want to be able to stop the malware on your refrigerator that is posting anti-Semitic rants to Twitter, but still have your beer stay cold. 6, a legal framework that offers certain privacy guarantees. A while ago, Snapchat got caught. They were telling people that photos disappeared within a few seconds, but it was discovered that they kept them for 30 days. What happened was Snapchat was then fined a small amount of money, I think $100,000, and told, please don't do it again. What I want is a legal framework that lets me as a site owner make binding promises that I will go to jail or be bankrupt if I violate them willfully, so that if I tell you, for example, that I'm going to collect every image you have right now from your phone and do cool facial recognition on it, but I'm not going to keep it more than an hour, you can believe me and you can sue me into oblivion if I'm lying to you. That unlocks a lot of interesting features that are impossible now just because of privacy concerns. Right now our choices are we don't give data or we give data forever. I want there to be a legal framework that lets people credibly make kind of intermediate solutions. So these reforms would restore a sense of agency and ownership to people about their data. They would also force companies to make the case to users about why they're collecting the data they do. People might be willing to do it, but right now we're just told use the service or not, we don't care. This is a way to make sure that people have to at least make the argument for why they're collecting all this stuff they do. And then if gutting the $60 billion online advertising industry is not radical enough for you, I also propose that we need to break up Facebook. Because of the potent way that it combines social life with publishing, Facebook poses a unique challenge. At a minimum, we need to break it up so that the social features are divorced from the news feed. We have this kind of separation in other places. In banks, for example, we recognize there has to be what's called, in the jargon, a Chinese wall between the stockbrokers and the investment bankers, so that there's just too much of a temptation otherwise to double deal with your clients. You see a similar thing with newspapers. There's a wall between the editorial department and the news department, or at least they're supposed to be. We need a similar wall in social media. I would be delighted if we could have decentralized social networks, if we didn't need anything like Facebook, just like we have in real life. People interact with people and then things organically happen. But if you have to have a central database of people's relationships, then it can't be the major publishing outlet. Facebook can remain a platform for connecting to friends, for your long-term photos and videos, for announcing life events, but it can't simultaneously be the platform for political organizing, political campaigns, and news delivery. We need a code of ethics for our industry. to guide the use of machine learning and its acceptable use on human beings. Other professions all have a code of ethics. So librarians have a great one. They hold really tightly to patron privacy. Everybody who goes through library school is inculcated with this commitment to patron privacy. Even lawyers, who we make fun of in jokes, have a high code of ethics. Journalists are taught to speak truth to power. Doctors have first do no harm. We have move fast and break shit. That is the closest that we have to a code of ethics in our industry. And look where it's gotten us, right? Young people who come into the industry have to have a shared culture of what is and is not acceptable in the use of computational tools. And above all, they need to learn that power always has to come with accountability, that you can't have one without the other. And finally, we have to pay our share. We need to plow the huge profits of the tech industry back into the communities that these industries grew out of. To be blunt, tech companies have to pay their taxes. Yesterday, we found out that Apple is now up to $240 billion that it's kept sitting overseas because it can't repatriate it without paying tax. California has the highest poverty rate in the United States when you adjust for cost of living. Part of the reason you have to adjust for cost of living is because the tech industry has raised housing prices so much by being there. And every Apple device you buy will say proudly on it, designed in California. But Apple uses a tax dodge to pretend that it's in Nevada and avoid paying California taxes. This is not unusual behavior. At the very least, it should be a source of shame for the company, and at best, it should be illegal. And paying our share also means offering a living wage to tech workers, whoever they are, not just the privileged cast of programmers and designers, but the many contract workers who work in the tech industry. The warehouse pickers who work in delivery services in places like Amazon, the people who drive nerd buses, the cooks, the janitors, the cleaners, security guards. Everyone who keeps the tech industry running has the right to a living wage. We are a rich industry. And when you give people a living wage, that money also goes back into your communities. You know, whoever you are, your children go to school together, presumably. So you want your community to thrive. So it's a tall order, right? Break up Facebook, destroy the ad industry, socialism, all these things I've asked for. Here's my blueprint in the few minutes I have left on how to get there. To make these substantive structural changes, we need leverage, right? And there are very few levers of power over the big tech companies. Because they're essentially monopolies, consumer boycotts don't work. Opting out of a site like Google is like opting out of online life. You know, you just cut yourself off. Some people can do it on principle, but asking people to do it in mass numbers is not a workable strategy. And trying to apply indirect pressure through the actual customers, so the publishers and the advertisers, can work for some limited goals, like the defunding that we talked about, the current panic around brand safety that's helping to take money away from sites like Breitbart. But if the goal is more fundamental reform, then we're stuck because you can't apply pressure through the thing that you're trying to abolish. Shareholder pressure at these companies doesn't work because the large tech companies are structured in a way that gives the founders absolute control no matter how many shares they have or don't have. So Zuckerberg, as long as he's at Facebook, is always going to be able to make the decisions. That is how the company is structured, and that is how investors have agreed to buy shares in it. And regulation is tricky, not just because we have a dysfunctional political system already, but because the large tech companies have a capable lobbyists and massive legal teams that can fight it. Press campaigns obviously can't work when these are the main outlets for online publishing and when the journalism has already been either destroyed or is on its last legs and dependent heavily on these new advertising business models. So the one effective lever that we have against tech companies is employee pressure. Software engineers are difficult to hire, they're expensive to train, and they take a long time to replace. Even really capable people, when you hire them at someone like Google, at a place like Google, take months and months to learn all of the internal culture, all of the cool internal tools, and become fully productive. And even though these the companies themselves are large, even small teams like the people who work in security or on the ops teams have the power to completely shut down a tech company if they act in concert and are sufficiently motivated. We saw some small demonstrations of the power of employee pressure in the last few months. The neveragain.tech pledge back in November pushed companies that had been silent for months to finally make a public commitment that they would not be involved in building a Muslim registry. Uber employees, of all people, pushed their CEO out of Trump's advisory council, and hopefully Tesla employees will do the same with Elon Musk. And there was an employee walkout at Google, which was quite striking during the first Muslim ban and refugee ban. where they prompted the founders and CEOs to come and talk to employees and issue these public statements in defense of immigration. These were small victories, but they were real victories. And we achieved them by individual employees who organized kind of in an ad hoc way. What we have yet to see in the industry is true collective action that uses the powerful tools of labor law to push for some of these goals that I've outlined. This is the one and only lever that can make change happen. As I said, even an ops team, if it threatens not just to walk out, but work to rule, follow the instructions by the book, would have enormous leverage over management if we chose to exercise it. Unfortunately, the enemy is and has been complacency. More than anything, tech workers still trust their companies, they trust the process, they trust their CEOs to do the right thing, they don't want to make people angry, and so our one chance to enact meaningful change is slipping away. Unless something happens to mobilize the tech workforce, or unless the advertising bubble finally bursts, we can expect this weird topsy-turvy status quo in 2017 to be the new normal now and for elections to come. And the important thing is to keep trying. I don't think we're going to succeed, but we have to try to succeed. Good intentions, as well-intentioned as we are not going to make structural problems in the industry go away. And talking honestly about them is a necessary first step, but in the end, we're either going to act or we're not. That said, talking about them takes a long time. I'm really grateful to you for being so attentive. I didn't have a single slide. I read from a prepared text, but you were champs about it. It is now 4:45. There are drinks outside, I think. What I would like to say is people who have questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Anybody who just wants to run out there and drink, please, I won't be offended if you get up and go. So let's do that. And we have someone with a microphone. So if anybody has questions, raise your hand and this person will run over to you. Oh, thank you. That's right.
Are you familiar with the GDPR, the European Union data privacy rules at all? Do you think that addresses any of the 6 rules that you spoke of earlier?
The question is about the European Union's rules on privacy. The beef I have with the European Union's privacy rules is that they're targeted to individual privacy. I like the idea very much of giving people more leverage over what is out there about their lives, giving them that sense of agency. But the problem the European Union doesn't address, because these laws are older than the phenomenon, is the mass data collection and cross-referencing of bulk data sets and things that are somewhat anonymized but still are very revealing about you just because you can analyze them to death. So I think the EU is unfortunately fixated on individual privacy, and I think misses this big change, which has been the mass data collection and the ways that it's effectively being mined and used. That's my take. Anybody else?
It's kind of a hard question, but I'll see if you have any thoughts on it. Earlier, you were talking about there should be like the one-click, make everything secure answer for journalists, for example. But there's a tension. On one hand, if I understand everything about the technology and I am the king of the world, then of course I can do all the really hard things and make myself secure. On the other hand, if I am an amateur, and let's face it, most of the world is, I'm trusting someone. Any thoughts on how we create the transparency that's not a one-click, hey, I'm a sucker button? Because how can they tell it apart?
That's a really good question. If you have a one-click, make me super secure button, how do you trust the people who are implementing it? And how do you evaluate it if you're not necessarily the most technical person in the world? In my mind, the trade-off here is there is a small group of, for most of us, the worst thing that can happen is we're locked out of our accounts and can't get back in. That is a disaster. There's a small subset of people for whom being locked out of your account, never being able to get back in, is a good outcome. And the worst thing that can happen is a government gets in there. So let's say you're a journalist in Egypt. You're detained, and the people looking at your device are able to recover your password and get to all your contacts. You've sentenced your friends and sources to prison. That is the kind of situation that very few people are in, but the people who are in it really, really need to be able to have confidence that these devices are correctly secured and configured, and we just lack that now. That's what I'm really referring to. The trust problem exists already. We have to trust something if we don't keep our lives. I know people who keep their lives completely offline, who compile their own Linux stuff that they've examined the source code for. It is an exhausting thing. We all trust companies to some extent. There's a reason, there's a basis for this, and this extends to people who are in a lot more risk than we are. All I want is, while punting on the trust problem, is to make the technical, the configuration problem go away for them. So the people who have vouched for it said that, just hit this button, it'll give you 6 big red warnings, but if you click through all of them, you are in a position where you can't harm the people you care about. And and use it with care. So that's kind of how I see it. Anybody else? Microphone friend, yes.
So one of the things that as I was listening to you, that just keeps coming to mind is the term Pandora's box. Basically, we've created it. It's out there. It's being used, and it won't be forgotten. No matter how much we want to try and pull that back, no matter how many laws that we write. I'm not disagreeing that we've went too far. I'm not disagreeing with many of your statements, but you have foreign companies that aren't bound by our laws. You have foreign companies. You have foreign governments that will probably use this. Look at China. They have their own social media to do a lot of this. How do you see? I mean, I guess I don't really have a question. It's just the frustration that we put it out there. Now it's out there, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Well, we put nuclear weapons out there, and then decided, oops, and it kind of worked. I mean, I haven't checked the news today, but. But so far, it worked for a long time where nobody's used them, which is kind of amazing. So to me, if we could do a take back on nuclear weapons sort of successfully with a lot of, nobody would have believed that it was possible, certainly not in the years right afterwards. So that gives me a little bit of hope. You see, I'm not a very optimistic person. My go-to source of optimism is nuclear war. But it does give me hope that it's at least worth trying, right? And all of your arguments I completely agree with, that this stuff is going to be out there. But it's one thing to have it be out there. It's another thing to have it be the default in kind of the way we live without even having made that decision just because we stumbled into it. Any other questions? People are great. Nobody wants to drink? All right.
What do you think about this new idea that Google has of federated machine learning, like where you train the algorithm and then you push it to your device? Do you think that's a good idea, and do you think that shows some cognizance on Google's perspective that this isn't working and maybe we should try to pivot to something else before we lose a ton of money?
I'm of two minds about it. On the one hand, I like anything that moves towards the direction of not storing all the raw data to train machine learning on. I think we can go a lot further in pre-processing it, cooking it, defanging it, so you can still get the machine learning goodness you want without having it all just sitting there in raw form. But I'm concerned about these other aspects, the stuff that I stole from Zeynep about the real alienness of machine algorithms and how we have to be careful about applying them, especially in social situations, just because we can't anticipate the ways they'll fail. And I think that anything that pushes machine learning further out into everyday interactions and makes it more usable by more people is something that we haven't thought enough about. So I like the idea of federation. I like the idea of not bringing the data to Google, but I'm not sure I want to pay the price of having machine learning, every 19-year-old with a twinkle in their eye and a startup idea having these tools and just blindly trying them out. Anybody else?
So I really appreciated your kind of diagnosis of the problems that we face, and there are clearly a lot of problems, and I agree with a lot of the suggestions that you make for reform and fixing some of them. What I thought was maybe missing from the talk was an acknowledgement that for all the downsides that these things have brought, there have also been upsides and good things that we've gained from this. So one example, I don't think it's a coincidence that police brutality in minority communities spiked when we had social networks and everybody had a camera in their pocket, right? So the kind of old system of journalism, as good as it was for certain things and preventing extremism, also had these huge blind spots that are now being covered in a way that they never would have been previously. So that's just one example. I guess my question is, on balance, do you think that we're worse off today for the monster that we've built, so to speak, or do you think that we've gained enough to, on net that it makes it worth it? Or, like, does that make sense in general?
It does make sense, and I think your example is an excellent one. Another thing that cameras have done for us, I can name two off the top of my head. One is we saw a really cool meteor in Siberia, thanks to dash cams. That would have been a local legend. Suddenly I can just go to YouTube and see. There's a lot of stuff that we now can witness. And we also know that UFOs just don't exist. So that was really helpful. I don't mean to trivialize your example. I think it's a really good one. The problem is there's 500 speakers that will tell you how great technology is. So I'm trying to fill a different niche. It doesn't mean that I hate it. One thing I'm honestly concerned about is in this very complex interconnected society, the ways things can fail can be really, really bad. I don't mean to be flippant about it, but in the 20th century, we saw the greatest genocides in human history. And there's nothing that convinces me that something like that couldn't happen in the 21st century. I was a lot more confident than I am now just because I didn't think that a lot of the politics that have happened could happen. So it's these small but horrible risks that I worry about. And I think they're hard to compare. They happen rarely, and we're human beings. We can't predict the future. But the ingredients that are being mixed together really concern me. So I also have a pessimistic, apocalyptic disposition. So I'm trying to make a career for myself, and this is really the best way I found to do it. You think I don't have a full go bag, waiting in the corner? Yeah. Anybody else? We're almost we have 4 minutes before my time limit.
I just wanted to ask a little bit about a commercial I saw. Like, I forgot what it was, but it was something with Watson and how it incorporated into something. And then, like, at the end, it was like massive amount of data will be sent over online to Watson to figure out like what you want, right? And
the last thing I saw for Watson advertised was Watson will help with your tax returns.
Yes, I think that's it. Yeah. So like you'll be sending all this stuff to Watson to figure out if it will save you money, $5. I don't know.
My favorite thing about the Watson ads is that most people's tax returns are like 4 pieces of information. Your how many deductions, your social security number, and your gross income. That's what so you don't need the full statistical power of modern AI to really crack that nut. But you see that it's becoming a coat of paint that people apply to stuff because it sells. It's a marketing term now. So.
I have a question. You mentioned control over data longevity, but that assumes you know who owns the data. So if I upload a picture of myself, I own it. If I upload a picture of you, who owns it? Do you own it, or do I own it? And control its longevity. That's
an excellent question. Like, what does it mean that the data is about you? If someone uploads a photo of me, is it theirs or mine? And it ties into a bigger problem that even if you want to opt out of everything and you don't use computers at all, you're still like Facebook has a profile about you with your real name because it's observed who you are from all your friends who are on the service. And this happens not just, I don't want to single them out for everything. So you can't even opt out of these sort of privacy violating things because everybody snitches you out to these services unintentionally. I do think that the behavioral data is a place where we control because no matter what, like if you observe stuff about what I do, you're not learning much about what other people do who are with me. And that data, that's why I want to focus on it and make it impossible to transfer it or sell it, and also make it time delimited. So the problem you outline is more subtle and more difficult, and I don't have an answer for it. All right, one more question and then go drink. All right, cool. Thank you all so much again.